I never imagined that our family ranch in Colorado would spark a full-blown conflict with the local HOA. But when they labeled my land as an unauthorized botanical facility, I uncovered something unexpected. My grandfather's old hydroelectric generator was the only backup power source for the entire neighborhood. What would you do if your enemies depended on you just to keep the lights on? The letter hit me like a punch to the gut. Violation notice. Unauthorized operation of a public botanical facility. I read it twice, wondering if it was some kind of joke. My family had owned this ranch for 3 generations, long before the upscale homes of Willow Ridge Estates sprang up like weeds after summer rain. I stepped onto the porch with my coffee mug and looked out over our 5 acres. Sure, I had rows of vegetables, some fruit trees, a modest greenhouse, and a few beehives, but calling it a public botanical facility was absurd. The phone rang inside. It was my neighbor, Jordan, who lived in the only other original ranch house left around here. "Dylan, did you get one too?" he asked, his voice tight. "A violation notice? Yeah, something about running a botanical site without permits," I said. Jordan let out a dry laugh. "They're trying to push us out. That developer, Skyview Partners, they're buying up every parcel they can get. They want luxury homes with rustic charm, which basically means they want our land." I thanked him and hung up, just in time to see a sleek silver Lexus SUV creeping past my fence. It stopped, and a woman with flawless highlights and oversized sunglasses stepped out. Holding a tablet, she started taking pictures of my front yard. I stepped onto the gravel path. "Can I help you?" She flinched slightly, but quickly recovered. "Miss Whitaker, Willow Ridge HOA," she said, not offering a handshake. "I'm documenting violations on your property." "I'm not part of your HOA," I replied, keeping my voice calm even as my irritation built. "This ranch has been here long before your subdivision existed." Her smile was tight and practiced. "That's a common misconception. When Willow Ridge Estates was incorporated, all properties within township limits became subject to our jurisdiction. Your property is causing multiple issues for our residents." "What kind of issues?" I asked. "Unregulated traffic, non-compliant agricultural activities, unauthorized commerce, and prohibited structures," she said, gesturing to my greenhouse. "And those solar panels? Completely out of line with HOA standards." "I've never signed any agreement," I said. "And those visitors, they're just friends and relatives helping out in the garden." Miss Whitaker tapped on her tablet. "We've logged 27 separate vehicles visiting your property this past month. That volume qualifies as commercial activity without proper permits. That was my cousin helping with the honey harvest and some neighbors picking up vegetables. I don't charge anyone." She didn't look up. "The board meeting is Thursday at 7 p.m. I recommend you attend if you'd like to avoid escalating fines." She turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and those rain barrels need to be removed immediately. They attract mosquitoes and clash with neighborhood aesthetics." As she drove off, I noticed people peeking out from behind their windows. One older gentleman across the street gave me a sympathetic nod before closing his blinds. That evening, a spring storm rolled in. I sat on my porch listening to rain hammer the metal roof while checking radar on my phone. The power flickered once, twice, and then went out. Except at my house. Back in the 1950s, my grandfather had installed a small hydroelectric generator on the creek that runs through our property. I'd maintained and upgraded it over the years, even added solar panels as a backup. When the grid went down, my system kicked on without a hitch. I looked out across the neighborhood. Every house was dark, except mine. I could see flashlights moving inside homes, headlights turning into driveways. My phone buzzed. It was Jordan. Power's out everywhere but your place. Did you know your generator is tied to the emergency pump station for the subdivision? I didn't. How could my small setup be connected to their water supply? Another message followed. Found some old utility maps at the county office last week. We need to talk. This might be bigger than we thought. Thunder cracked overhead. I stared down the road as headlights appeared. Miss Whitaker's silver SUV pulled up to my mailbox. She sat there staring at my lit-up windows for a long moment, then drove away. I barely slept that night, tossing and turning with dreams of shifting property lines and shadowy deals. By sunrise, I was already up, making a list of documents to find. My grandfather was meticulous with records. I knew the old roll-top desk in the study would hold what I needed. I spent the morning sorting through yellowed folders, and finally I found it. The original deed.
Deeds, water rights, permits for the hydroelectric system. According to the documents, my grandfather had secured every necessary permission decades ago. As I organized the paperwork, a convoy of vehicles pulled into my gravel driveway. Miss Whitaker stepped out of the lead SUV, flanked by a man in a tailored suit and several others carrying clipboards and cameras. They moved toward the house like they were serving a warrant. I met them on the porch, documents in hand. Before I could speak, Miss Whitaker announced, "This is Mr. Reynolds from the County Assessor's Office, along with members of the Willow Ridge HOA Board. We're here regarding your unauthorized power facility and the multiple code violations reported on your property." Mr. Reynolds stepped forward. "We've received reports that you're operating an unlicensed power generation system that may be interfering with the township's utility grid." I held up my grandfather's old paperwork. Everything here was properly permitted back in 1952, and it's been kept up to code ever since. Miss Whitaker cut in. "The HOA covenants strictly prohibit private power generation. It's a safety hazard and visually disruptive to the community." "I'm not a member of your HOA," I said firmly. "Actually," interrupted a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, "there's a bit of a gray area there. I'm Walter Green, the HOA's legal counsel. The original development agreement from 1985 includes provisions about adjacent properties being subject to shared jurisdiction." My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from Jordan. "Don't sign anything. On my way with the maps." "I'd like to see that agreement," I said, buying time. "And I'll need to consult with my attorney before we go any further." Miss Whitaker's face tightened. "This isn't a negotiation. The board has already voted. You have 30 days to bring your property into compliance or face daily fines." "Under what authority?" I asked. "Township Ordinance 15B," Mr. Reynolds chimed in. "It allows for enforcement of community standards in rural-urban transition zones." I was about to respond when thunder cracked overhead and a bolt of lightning lit up the sky. Rain began to pour in sheets. The entire group flinched. "Perhaps we should continue this another time," Mr. Reynolds said, nervously eyeing the storm. They retreated quickly to their vehicles. Moments later, Jordan's pickup skidded to a stop in my driveway. He jumped out, carrying a large cardboard tube under one arm. Did they mention the power connection? He asked, breathlessly, glancing at the retreating HOA convoy. They said my generator might be interfering with the township grid, I replied. Jordan shook his head. It's a lot bigger than that. Come inside. I need to show you something, and it could flip this whole thing in your favor. We unrolled the maps across my kitchen table just as the power went out again, everywhere except at my place. Jordan pointed to a fine blue line on one of the township maps. See this? It's an emergency power conduit installed back in the 70s during the energy crisis. Your grandfather allowed them to connect his generator to the township's water pumping station as a backup. I leaned in closer. I knew about the generator, but not this. The really interesting part, Jordan continued, pulling out a more recent map, is what happened when they developed Willow Ridge Estates. Look here. He pointed to where the blue line forked. They tapped into your power line without proper easement documentation. Your system has quietly been powering their emergency infrastructure for over 30 years, and I'll bet most of the residents don't even know it. Rain lashed the windows as I tried to wrap my head around it. So every time the grid goes down, your generator kicks in and keeps their water flowing, their security systems active, and probably some other critical services running, Jordan finished. And based on these records, they never paid you or your family a single cent. No wonder Miss Whitaker looked like she'd seen a ghost last night, I muttered. She knows they rely on me. Jordan grinned. It gets better. Skyview Partners, the developer trying to build those condos, they need guaranteed utility redundancy to move forward with construction. Your ranch is the only thing standing between them and a multi-million-dollar project. The next morning, I went straight to the county records office. The clerk, a woman named Diane, recognized my last name right away. "Oh, Harold, he was ahead of his time," she said warmly, flipping through filing drawers. "Set up that generator when people thought he was nuts. Then, during the blizzard of '78, your ranch was the only place with power for miles. Emergency services ran out of your barn for 3 days. Do you know if he was ever compensated for connecting to the new development?" I asked. Diane adjusted her glasses. There was supposed to be an agreement and payment, but after Harold passed, I think the whole thing got lost in the shuffle. I doubt anyone told your parents. Armed with copies of all the relevant records, I drove back through the rain-soaked Colorado countryside. The storm had flooded low roads, and downed branches were everywhere. As I passed through Willow Ridge Estates, I could see power crews trying to sort out the latest outages, completely unaware that the system keeping their water flowing ran right through my land.
I noticed the low hum of portable generators outside several of the larger homes in Willow Ridge Estates. As I pulled into my driveway, I spotted a news van parked near my mailbox. A reporter and cameraman were speaking with my elderly neighbor, Mr. Lawson, the same man who had waved to me during Miss Whitaker's first visit. I parked and walked over. "Can I help you?" The reporter turned, her expression brightening. "Are you the property owner? I'm Rebecca Chun, Channel 8 News. We're doing a story on the unusual power situation in this neighborhood. Mr. Lawson tells us your ranch has some kind of independent power supply." Before I could answer, Miss Whitaker's SUV screeched to a halt beside us. She leapt out, visibly furious. "This is private property," she snapped at the reporter. "The Willow Ridge HOA has not authorized any media presence."
"We're not on HOA property," Rebecca replied calmly. "We're interviewing residents about the ongoing power outage." Miss Whitaker turned on me. "This is your doing, isn't it? Calling the media to stir up some kind of spectacle?" "I just got here," I said flatly. Mr. Lawson spoke up, his voice a little shaky. "I called them. People have a right to know what's going on. My wife needs oxygen 24/7, and her backup battery only lasts 6 hours. If it weren't for this ranch's power setup feeding into the emergency circuit at our place, she'd be in the hospital right now." Miss Whitaker's expression faltered. "What emergency circuit?" Mr. Lawson pointed to a small gray box attached to the side of his garage. "The one the developers installed when our home was built. They said it was connected to a backup system for people with medical needs. It's worked perfectly during every outage for the last 15 years. Rebecca raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "So some homes in this neighborhood are powered during blackouts by your ranch, but others aren't? How's that decided?" "It's not decided at all," I said, pulling out the maps Tyler had found. "It's an old, informal arrangement my grandfather made during the energy crisis in the 1970s. The township was supposed to formalize it, but after he passed, they just kept using the system without any kind of official agreement." Rebecca turned to Miss Whitaker. "Is the HOA aware that it's been benefiting from a private power source for free all these years?" Miss Whitaker's face turned red. "This is a complex situation, currently being addressed through the proper channels. The HOA is simply enforcing community standards, which this ranch has repeatedly violated." "What violations exactly?" Rebecca asked. "Unauthorized commerce, non-permitted structures, aesthetic violations." Mr. Lawson cut her off with a loud snort. "They're calling it a botanical garden because he grows vegetables and lets neighbors pick some. Heaven forbid we get fresh food instead of another useless patch of turf grass." The camera was rolling, catching every word. Miss Whitaker noticed and abruptly snapped, "No comment," before retreating to her SUV. As she drove away, Rebecca turned to me. "Would you be willing to give an interview about what's going on here? It sounds like a real David versus Goliath story." "I need to talk to an attorney first," I said cautiously, "but I can show you how the hydroelectric system works if you're interested." While the news crew filmed the modest setup behind my barn, I received a text from an unknown number. "Emergency HOA board meeting, tonight 8 p.m. Topic, power infrastructure. Your presence is requested. Walter Green, HOA legal counsel." Later that afternoon, Tyler arrived, and he brought someone with him. His cousin Emma, an environmental law attorney. "This is fascinating," Emma said after flipping through my paperwork. "You've got a strong case. They've been using your infrastructure without permission or compensation for decades, and now they're trying to push you out using HOA code enforcement." "What should I do about the emergency meeting tonight?" I asked. Emma smiled. "Oh, we're definitely going. But first, let's prepare something enlightening." At her suggestion, I led them to the old utility shed near the creek, where the switch connecting my generator to the Willow Ridge emergency system was housed. It was a straightforward setup, a heavy-duty switch that determined whether my generator's excess power flowed into the development's infrastructure during outages. "You're legally within your rights to shut this off," Emma explained. "It's on your land, and there's no valid easement on file." I stared at the switch, conflicted. But Mr. Lawson's wife needs her oxygen, I said. Which is why we're not going to flip it, Emma replied. But the HOA needs to understand what's at stake. This is leverage, and we're going to use it. As evening approached, another storm rolled in. Weather alerts warned of severe thunderstorms and possible tornadoes. My phone buzzed again, this time with messages from neighbors I'd never spoken to before. They all asked some variation of the same question. If the power goes out again, will your backup system still work tonight? The news segment had already aired. It included interviews with Mr. Lawson and shots of my hydroelectric generator. Rebecca had closed the story with a sharp question. Who really holds the power in Willow Ridge Estates, the HOA or the ranch they've spent years trying to shut down? As I got ready to leave for the emergency meeting, lightning split the sky and the lights flickered. I looked over at the switch Emma had shown me and thought hard about the decision ahead.
Would I keep supplying power to the very people trying to take my home away? Or was it time to show them just how much they'd taken for granted all these years? After 3 straight days of outages, tensions in Willow Ridge were running high. I looked out my window and saw a line of cars kicking up dust as they pulled into my driveway. Miss Whitaker's red SUV led the charge, followed closely by 5 other vehicles packed with HOA board members. This wasn't gonna be a friendly visit. I took a deep breath and stepped onto the porch just as they slammed their car doors shut in unison. "You've gone too far this time," Miss Whitaker shouted, storming toward me with a stack of papers in her hand. Her face was the same shade of red as her car. "People have medications that need refrigeration. Mr. Donnelly missed an important job interview on Zoom. This is criminal behavior." The rest of the board fanned out behind her like backup dancers in an angry music video. "Good morning to you two," I said calmly, though my heart was racing. "Coffee, anyone? I just brewed a fresh pot." "Don't play games with us," she snapped. "We know exactly what you're doing. These outages started right after our last visit." She thrust the papers into my chest. "This is a cease and desist letter from our attorney. We are suing you for interference with public utilities." I glanced at the letter, but didn't take it. "Not sure what you mean. The storms have been rough lately." "Funny how your lights stay on while everyone else is left in the dark," muttered Mr. Peterson, the HOA treasurer, crossing his arms. I reached inside the front door and pulled out the folder I'd prepared. "Since we're all sharing paperwork, you might want to take a look at these." Miss Whitaker snatched the folder and flipped it open, her eyebrows rising as she stared at my grandfather's original property deed, water rights, and engineering permits, all dating back to 1943. "My family has held these rights for over 80 years, I explained. "The hydro generator was installed long before any of your homes were even built. And there's no law requiring me to provide emergency power to a development that expanded around our land without formal agreements." The board members leaned in to get a better look at the documents. Mr. Weston, the board's oldest member, wearing thick glasses and a bow tie, adjusted his lenses. "Actually, Elaine," he said to Miss Whitaker slowly, "he appears to be right. These water rights do predate the subdivision by several decades. Miss Whitaker's jaw clenched. That's impossible. The developer promised us. Skyview misled you, I cut in. They knew about my family's water and infrastructure rights. They just gambled that no one would check. The board members exchanged uneasy glances. "What are you talking about?" asked Mrs. Freeman, the board's secretary. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a set of screenshots Tyler had collected through a public records request. Skyview promised certain board members premium units in the upcoming Riverside condo complex. Discounted prices, better views, even custom finishes. As I scrolled, their names appeared on screen. Whitaker, Peterson, Martinez, Lung, all current board members. The only name missing? Weston. "You hacked our emails?" Miss Whitaker gasped. "Public records request," I replied. "In this county, HOA communications are subject to transparency laws." Mr. Weston's thick eyebrows furrowed as he turned toward her. "Elaine, you never said anything about deals with Skyview. We're supposed to vote on all potential conflicts of interest." The tone of the meeting shifted immediately. The united front they'd arrived with was gone. Board members were now side-eyeing one another with suspicion. "I never wanted to cut off power," I said quietly. "I just wanted to be left alone with my so-called botanical garden." As they processed this, a car door slammed behind them. A young woman with bright blue hair and a backpack covered in environmental stickers jogged up the driveway. "Mom, what's going on?" she asked Miss Whitaker. Jade stiffened. "Jade, go back to the house. This is HOA business." Jade's eyes widened as she looked around and realized where she was. "Wait, is this the sustainable ranch I saw in Professor Garcia's class? We've studied this place. He used it as a case study in renewable energy systems." For the first time all day, Miss Whitaker looked speechless. "You're the guy with the micro-hydro system and heritage seed bank, right?" Jade asked me, her tone excited. "Our class wanted to visit places like this for our capstone project." "This isn't a tourist site," Miss Whitaker snapped. "It's a zoning violation and a nuisance." Jade stared at her in disbelief. "Mom, this farm is the future of sustainable agriculture. You're siding with developers who want to bulldoze it for cookie-cutter condos?" The moment landed hard. Even board members looked uncomfortable. "This isn't about environmentalism, Jade," Miss Whitaker muttered. "It's about property values, community standards." "It's about kickbacks and personal gain," Mr. Weston interjected, waving the printed emails. "I've been on this board for 15 years, and I've never been so disappointed." The confrontation dissolved into chaos, not between me and the HOA, but among the board members themselves. Miss Whitaker pointed fingers at me, then at Mr. Weston, then at her daughter. Peterson tried to defend the arrangement with Skyview as standard practice. Freeman and Martinez were whispering fiercely to each other, clearly shaken. Dark clouds gathered overhead. The wind picked up, scattering leaves across the yard. A low rumble of thunder rolled in the distance. "You should all head home," I said evenly. "Another storm's moving in, fast." Miss Whitaker gave me one final venomous glare. "This isn't over, not by a long shot."
As if on cue, lightning flashed across the sky, followed by a sharp crack of thunder that made everyone flinch. Without another word, the board members hurried back to their cars, still arguing as they slammed the doors. Jade lingered. She slipped me a torn scrap of paper with her email on it. "Please keep in touch," she said quietly, before reluctantly following her mother. I stood on the porch as the first heavy raindrops began to fall. My phone buzzed with a new weather alert. Severe thunderstorm warning. Power outages expected. I looked down at my phone. The generator control app was open, my thumb hovering over the emergency disconnect button. I had a choice to make. Let the neighborhood sit in the dark again, or be the bigger person. Rain poured down, soaking through my clothes as I stood there, torn between vengeance and compassion. What would my grandfather have done? Dark clouds loomed over the community center as cars filled the parking lot. I gripped my presentation folder tightly, watching people rush inside to escape the drizzle. Tonight would decide everything. Local news vans lined the curb. What had begun as a private dispute between me and the HOA had turned into a full-blown community crisis, especially after the local paper ran its front-page headline, "Power Struggle, Historic Farm versus Developer Dreams." Inside, the meeting room buzzed with tension. Tyler waved to me, saving a seat in the front row. Miss Whitaker sat on the far side with the remaining loyal board members. Mr. Weston had clearly defected, sitting instead with a group of older residents near the back. A cluster of men in suits, the Skyview executives, huddled together along the wall, checking their watches impatiently. Mayor Wilson stepped up to the microphone. "Folks, we've got a complicated situation here, one that affects every one of you. We're going to hear from all parties tonight and try to find a path forward." When my name was called, my legs felt like rubber as I walked to the podium. Dozens of faces turned toward me, some curious, some skeptical, others downright hostile. I'm not a botanical garden," I began, my voice cracking a bit. I cleared my throat and tried again. "But maybe I should be." A ripple of murmurs moved through the crowd. I clicked to the first slide of my presentation, a map of the area with the creek highlighted in blue. My grandfather built our hydroelectric system during World War II, when resources were scarce and people relied on each other to survive, I said. He believed in self-reliance, but more than that, he believed in community. I clicked to a black and white photo, my grandfather standing proudly beside the original generator. I didn't even know the system still powered parts of this neighborhood until a few weeks ago. When I found out, I was angry, not because I didn't want to help, but because the HOA didn't ask. They threatened. They tried to take. Miss Whitaker shifted in her seat. But fighting won't solve anything. So I'm proposing something different. I clicked to my final slides. A title appeared in bold across the screen. Willow Ridge Microgrid, a community-owned power cooperative. Gasps, whispering. I laid out the plan. Expand the hydro system into a self-sustainable microgrid. Open the gardens as public teaching spaces for sustainable agriculture. Provide every home with clean, renewable power at fixed rates. You'd be independent of the major utility companies, I explained. No more unpredictable rate hikes. Plus, we'd qualify for major federal and state green energy tax credits. The room came alive with murmurs and cautious optimism as I returned to my seat. Mayor Wilson stepped forward. We'll now open the floor to questions. A woman in the back stood up. Who's paying for all this high-tech equipment? Before I could respond, someone else stepped up. I might have an answer, said a familiar voice. It was Jade, Miss Whitaker's daughter. She walked confidently to the front of the room, shouldering her backpack covered in stickers reading things like "Save the soil" and "Local power equals local control." Miss Whitaker froze. Jade said, "I've been in touch with my university's environmental science department. They're willing to offer $250,000 partnership grant to fund this project as a living teaching lab for renewable energy and sustainable farming." The room erupted into excited chatter. Miss Whitaker opened her mouth, then shut it again. Skyview's lead executive practically ran to the microphone. "Please, people, let's not get carried away. This amateur operation can't compete with our vision for Willow Ridge's future." He clicked through a slideshow of glossy renderings, luxury condos, infinity pools, rooftop gardens. "Think about your property values. We're offering premium buyouts to all current homeowners. Guaranteed return, guaranteed amenities." Tyler stood up next. "Before you get too excited about those pretty pictures," he said, "you might want to see these," he said. He handed out a stack of printouts. The photos showed half-finished North Star projects in other counties. Abandoned buildings surrounded by rusting fences, empty sales offices, promises undelivered. "They start big," Tyler said. "Then they run into unexpected complications, and communities are left with a mess."
Tyler continued, explaining how the projects typically stalled once the original residents sold and moved out. Then North Star would return, quietly downsizing the development while hiking up the prices. The Skyview executives tried to interrupt, but it was too late. The trust was broken. Mayor Wilson stepped up. Time to vote. My palms were slick as the ballots were distributed and marked. When the results came in, the room collectively exhaled. 82% voted to pursue the community cooperative plan. The Skyview reps stormed out before the final count was even finished. As the room emptied, people came up to speak with me, asking about the co-op, offering skills, time, resources. Mr. Weston promised to help with legal paperwork. A retired electrician offered her expertise. A local high school science teacher said his students wanted to get involved. Miss Whitaker lingered near the door, looking uncertain and more alone than I'd ever seen her. Jade was deep in conversation with Mayor Wilson about the grant application process. I walked slowly over to Miss Whitaker. "It's not too late to be part of this," I said gently. She stared at me with unreadable eyes. "You humiliated me in front of everyone." "You tried to take my family's land," I replied, "but I'd rather build something together than hold on to that." 6 months later, the first phase of the project was complete. New turbines tripled our energy output. The old barn had been converted into a community education center. Fresh garden plots now filled my southern field. There was already a waiting list of residents hoping for a spot. Spring sunshine warmed my shoulders as I adjusted irrigation lines for a row of newly planted berry bushes. A familiar red SUV pulled up along the gravel road. Miss Whitaker stepped out slowly, carrying a tray of seedlings. She wore a brand new pair of gardening gloves, the price tag still dangling. She looked hesitant as she walked toward me. "My plot is number 47, right?" I nodded. "Right next to Jade's. She planted tomatoes yesterday." "This wasn't my idea," she said stiffly. "My daughter said I'd never hear the end of it if I didn't at least try." I hid my grin and handed her a trowel. "Welcome to the garden, neighbor." She paused, then took it. For a moment, we stood silently. Overhead, new power lines hummed gently with electricity pulled from the same creek that had sustained my family for generations. Finally, Miss Whitaker broke the silence. "I got an offer on my house yesterday," she said, "from a young couple. They said they specifically wanted to live here because of the cooperative." "Are you going to sell?" She glanced around, at the garden plots, at her daughter laughing with other volunteers near the education center, at the creek running strong through the land that had once divided us. "No," she said softly. "Some things are worth more than money." I nodded, understanding. It wasn't an apology, not exactly, but it was enough. Sometimes victory doesn't come from defeating your enemies. Sometimes it comes from turning them into reluctant allies. My grandfather would have approved.